All right, my name is Kristin, and I live in Annapolis, Maryland, and I'm 59 years old, and I have been a flight attendant, and I've lived in a lot of interesting places, but my favorite place in the whole world is where I live now, in Annapolis. So we bought a house in Annapolis in 1996 and had a really great life. The end of 2021, I was told that I had myelofibrosis, which I had never heard of, and they said it's a very rare blood disease. And the treatment for it, I didn't have many options. The treatment for it was a stem cell, also called a bone marrow transplant. Myelofibrosis is basically the hardening of your art, a very rare disease. I'd never heard about it. I don't know anybody that has. And luckily, I had a sister that navigated me through the whole process because it's complicated. The treatment and the stem cell transplant is complicated. Lots can go wrong, but I don't think it did. I think I was lucky. It started with me needing phlebotomies because I was producing too many red blood cells. And they just said it's not that uncommon. And so every like 3 months, I would go to the blood center and pump out like a couple of pints of blood. And then they would, of course, discard it because it wasn't good blood. It had too many red blood cells. But it was painless and I didn't feel different going in or coming out. And I did that for like a year. And then one time my blood cell count didn't need it. And I was like, "Oh, that's odd." I thought that was a good sign. But then shortly after, I had some blood work done and my platelets were very, very low. And so my general doctor wanted me to see an oncologist. And he did a bone marrow biopsy and he turned me over to University of Maryland, his favorite local oncologist in charge of that, and he recommended I get a bone marrow transplant. Felt great. I wasn't tired, I wasn't fatigued. The only symptom I could say was that I bruised really easily. There were bruises on my hands and my legs and my arms, and something weird, I would wake up with really itchy arms. I had itchy arms. But no fatigue. I play a lot of tennis. Nothing. They said it's not genetic. Nobody in my family ever had something like this. I'm a really healthy person. I juice. I take vitamins. And they said it's just my oncologist at University of Maryland is fantastic, and he's a real rose-colored vision kind of guy and non-alarmist. And he said there's no explanation. It's not. It wasn't environmental. It wasn't genetic. It wasn't my lifestyle. I mean, at first, I think before the phlebotomy, they said before those treatments, they said maybe it was related to my working at altitude all the time, but then they ruled that out. There really was no other treatment that was suggested for me than the transplant. It wasn't like you could take a drug to increase your platelets. There was nothing, that was kind of like the only solution. But he did say, since I felt so good, I could wait a year or two or three. He said, you feel good, but he said it's better to do this kind of procedure when you're young. And I also wanted to, the way I am is I want to get it done. He just said, this is what you're going to need to do, and you're going to need a donor, and you're going to need to take like a year off work. And that shocked me. I mean, that was very shocking. It turned out to be a year and a half, but I've never been sick. I had no problems having babies, and I've never been sick. I had a few cervical issues, but they were cured. I mean, they said that's common for women in their 30s, just irregular cells. That was my only history having anything wrong with me. And they said that's pretty much the treatment. There's nothing else you could do, but it was up to me as to when to do it. And it was on my ward at University of Maryland. I was like the youngest person there. I mean, I was amazed that older bodies could go through that. They got the diagnosis from the bone marrow biopsies. And I've had probably at least 10 of them in my life. And then after I had the transplant, and they see how it's doing they look at the progress all on a bone marrow biopsy. Their diagnosis was based on the bone marrow biopsy. I guess that's where they get all their information about my cell count and my platelet count. And I guess that's the key to this kind of disease is through the bone marrow biopsy. They just looked at my counts, and my platelet counts were getting gradually worse and worse and worse, and they just said the next step was the biopsy, which was pretty much a no-brainer. It takes like 10 minutes, and then they got the results, and they said, "This is what we recommend." It was, I mean, obviously it was frightening, but I felt confident this wasn't something I was gonna die prematurely of. I mean, there was treatment for it. And I'm not like, when I get my readouts, I have, my sister's a nurse, and she's always my right hand when it comes to looking at my blood work and my white cell count. And she knows my neutrophils, and she's just kind of my interpreter because a lot of that's so foreign to me. Translates all the, and she was my donor. So she took a really vested interest in it. And she just kind of translates because the medical world, I'm not particularly interested in or comfortable with. I'm not that comfortable with the medical world. And I actually went for a second opinion at Hopkins, and she had a book. The doctor there, her name was, I think, Dr. Jane. She was a really nice Indian woman, and she recommended this book. And I went to Barnes and Noble. It was all about myelofibrosis. I could never get my hands on the book. I guess it wasn't that popular, or it was out of print or something, but I would have definitely read that. But I've never heard of it. It's basically, I guess, your platelets become like concrete. They're supposed to be spongy, and they become concrete. Everyone said, "What?" And even when people say, "What were you out with?" I said it was kind of like a blood disorder, but there's no point in saying myelofibrosis because nobody knows what it is. I vaguely remember there was no other option than the transplant. I mean, there was no medication to improve my platelets. My only option was when to do it. Picking a time frame, finding a donor. Luckily, I have 2 children, and that's a really good thing because they said um, age of the donor is important to its success. And that's when my son was living in Maui, so he wasn't an option, or I didn't want him to interrupt his life. And Danielle stepped up to the plate and said she would do it. And then she started going for all the visits, the background, the blood work, the lung test. She started going to all the visits. And then when she was diagnosed, so she started going through all the tests that a donor needs to go through, that you need to match in all these different ways. Not just, I mean, everybody thinks it's the same blood type. It's not even that. It's just there's all these chemical matches. And she was going through the whole process of, and they were confident, she was young, she was 24 or 25, and they were confident she'd be great because she's really healthy too. And then when it came to the chest x-ray, it was Friday afternoon. I remember they took her in after the result, and the doctor said, "You have a tumor." And it was pretty sizable. And she called me, obviously. She goes, "Where are you?" And I said, I'm just about to take off. We were taxiing out, but I just wanted to know if anything was up or what's going on. And she goes, "Oh, nothing. I'll talk to you when you come back Sunday." Because she knew I would probably break down. And so Sunday, we came over here, and I remember going, "Do you want to go watch the Ravens games at a sports bar?" I said, "Do you want to go out?" And she was, "No." And I thought, my first thought was, can't be my donor. And I thought I thought she had news to tell me through the process. I thought she was going to tell me she couldn't be my donor because we didn't match. And so when she came upstairs and she said, "I have a tumor in my chest, and it's big, and it's near my heart." And we just both started crying and going, "This doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense." And then we clung on to the hope it would be benign, because then she went through the PET scan, she went through the biopsy of the tumor, and we all kept going, "It's going to be benign, it's going to be benign, and it wasn't. And that's when they put her on a chemo treatment. That was a roller coaster because she handled it well, and she rang the bell. She was done with her chemo treatment, and but then, like, they sell it. She had a little cancer-free celebration, but then like 4 months after she stopped chemo, they found a lymph node. They said they called it hot, it was like it showed up red on the PET scan, and that's when they said it never it was called refractory because it didn't she didn't respond to the chemo in order for this lymph node to come back. And I that was probably the worst part of the whole thing because I thought she was headed towards what I went through, which was it's really hard when 25 and supposed to be doing so many other things. And got through it. And I don't know, her and her boyfriend have this great relationship. They still were able to laugh and enjoy themselves and go for walks. I mean, and they got a kitten that they love to death, and they got through it. They navigated their way through it, and now we're just in a state of relief, and they have a great future ahead of them. Oh yeah, and another thing was they have a bank called Find My Match. It's this huge stem cell bank worldwide, and they said, "You are literally one in a million." I did not have a match because I've seen all these videos where people meet the person who gave them their cells, and they might be from a different country, but I had no match in there, and they couldn't really explain there. But so even though my sister was 61 at the time, they said pretty much there were advantages because we were siblings from the same parents. We had certain matches there, but they didn't dwell on the fact that she was old, and they never blamed that for being as. I really rejected them. I remember the radiation was being fitted, and it seemed medieval. You get fitted with straps, and you go into this. I did 2 days of radiation. I think it was like 15 minutes on each side, and then is and then the chemo, I never really knew how that worked. You get a port and it just goes right in your port and you don't feel a thing. There's no pain or you don't feel anything. And then they called it the eat, drink, and be merry days. After the chemo went in, I felt really good and I would go on the treadmill. I couldn't leave the floor. But then, and my nurses were all right. They predicted a grade, like by about day 10, you feel really sick and you don't have any energy. You have no appetite, no energy. So everything they say about chemo is true. Whereas Danielle went to Hopkins, different team of different, probably what do they call it, mixture, different doses and everything like that, and it did not affect her as badly. I don't think she ever had diarrhea, and I had it pretty much for like 2 months. So it affects everybody differently, but it was a slow healing. And again, Danielle didn't have a slow healing. She was like right back at it. But so it could have been we had kind of different treatments. I was in the hospital 5 weeks, and it was like being in a bubble. And you think it's really relaxing, like you could read or watch a lot of TV or movies, but they're constantly checking you. Every 3 hours, they do vitals. But I got a lot of support from them, and of course, I had my designated visitors. And the 5 weeks went by fast. And then when I got home, my best friend from Indiana, you need a caregiver. You need somebody to live in case you fall, in case you somebody to check your temperature every morning, every night, just to really monitor you. And she gave up 3 months of her life and came to live with me. And because she has a really busy life and she was the perfect person for it. She's a court reporter, so she took notes. She took charge of my meds because you're taking 20 pills a day. She organized charge of them. She went with me to every appointment. She's just an incredible person to do that. I wasn't allowed to vacuum. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere without a mask. I wasn't allowed in restaurants. I wasn't allowed eat anything that other people brought in. They made me kind of paranoid of germs and going outside and eating anything that hasn't been washed. No sushi, no undercooked, no lunch meats. I mean, they really put the fear if I got sick, pneumonia or COVID or that, it could have been really bad. But because I didn't have anything off, but I didn't. But they put the fear in. And when they found out I did not accept any of my sister, I accepted like 2% of my sister's cells. They were obviously disappointed. They looked at it as somewhat of a failure. I mean, I remember this one nurse saying, since your transplant was a failure, and I was so mad because I said to Dr. Rappaport, why did she call it a failure? And he goes, it was just a bad choice of words. It didn't work as planned. But he said, you still succeeded in getting rid of the JAK2. They called it a mutation. I got rid of some mutations in it. And like I said, I'm not privy to all this terminology. But he said it wasn't a failure. And then and I was just so upset about that because it did show I wasn't doing anything drastic. It did show that my immune system was weak. Well, yesterday was actually the first day I went off Valtrex. But I think the bottom line is if this comes back or I get another one. I met people on my floor that were on their second or third. I think that's happens, and I would do it again in a second. I mean, it's really interesting because Danielle, different than me, like I just wanted to get through it without any, she investigated and she talked to people who had been through it and she wanted to know where you are at this point and this point and this point. And I just want to kind of dive in and then afterwards forget about it. But she met a few people that had myelofibrosis online and they talked. My best friend came to me to one of my appointments and she goes, I don't understand really what's going on with Kristin. Is she cancer free? And not Dr. Rappaport, the other one said, she's never going to be cancer free. It's just the way it works. I could be, but there's no guarantee. Yeah, I mean, I obviously, when I go to the doctor, I have kind of like little fear, but he emphasizes, Dr. Rappaport, that I have been stable. My numbers are stable. They're not off the charts great, but they're not getting worse. And they've been stable like the last year. And he's just such a great guy to deal with because he always looks on the bright side. And he always says, you're doing well. And that's all you want to hear after something like that. And I need more sleep than I ever did, but I think that's all right. I just get more sleep. That's about it. I rave about Dr. Rappaport because he was positive, but there's a lot of negativity. And, when I was in New York City and I started running a fever, I said, can I come in tomorrow? I called University of Maryland. I said, because I'm running a fever and I don't feel that bad. I'm just running a fever. And I know you don't like that. And she get to an emergency room right now. And I was like, why? Why can't I see you at like 8 tomorrow morning? I'll catch the next flight. And she said, because it could go into your bloodstream. The infection could go into your bloodstream and you deal with some fatalistic people. And she completely said, this is an emergency situation. And I did. I went to the emergency room. And as you know, in New York City, that took about 6 hours. And they diagnosed me with pneumonia and I went on medication and I got over it in a couple of weeks. But you deal with people that are the glass is half empty and your numbers aren't rebounding as we would have liked. And my advice is just find a positive person that points out the good things. You really have to rely on other people because to keep your spirits up. I mean, I had people come over and do puzzles with me, but you have to rely on other people and take in all the positives. And, I love to eat and I love to drink wine and you just have to replace it with other things. And for me, it was puzzles and we watched Ted Lasso and I eat a lot of ice cream. And I think to be alone without anybody that loved you or cared for you, really dark. And Danielle had that. I thought I was going to be her primary. I wanted them to move in with me after she got out of the hospital, and they were like, "No, we're we're adults, and we want to do it our way." And every time I tried to say this pill system is really good, it's Monday to Friday AM and they went, "No, nope. We're going to figure this out our way." And I respect them. Well, that was the hardest part for me because I couldn't, even though she's got this wonderful guy and he kept saying, I got this. a mother's instinct is to be able to take care of her and go to treatments and to baby her with all the food she likes, and I couldn't at those stages. And we all got through it.